Brought up in a loving family, really. When I got to about the age of 11, my life completely changed. You know, sadly I was raped. I was so desperate inside. I can't tell you how painful it was inside me. All these years, pain just swirling. And in a second, I just put it under my chin and I just pulled the trigger. I helped him, you know, and he died 2 years later. I never told him. He was the man that raped me. I'm Pastor Mick Fleming. I run a charity called Church on the Street. My life's been a strange life, from abuse, death, drug addiction, crime, to becoming a bishop. So it don't get much stranger, really. I went out to school one day, just kind of like this happy-go-lucky kid. Bit of a mummy's boy, really. And on my way to school, I was attacked. And I still sometimes get them little flashbacks, and it's a taste in my mouth of like a woolly jumper coming across my mouth and not being able to breathe. And, you know, sadly I was raped. And I didn't sort of understand what was happening. Understood the pain, the fear. And the man that did it sort of, I was on the floor after, and he picked me up off the floor by my throat, and he said that if I told anybody, he'd kill my mum and dad. And if you can imagine, I was 11, but more like all those years ago, more like a 7-year-old is now. So I was a real child, you know, kind of a real kid, really. And it petrified me. And something happened to me physically and spiritually as well. So it was like, describe it as having my head in a bucket of water. So I could hear the noise all around me, but I wasn't there. It was distant. And my eyesight was black and white. It was like the colour had been drained out of what I could see. I think a significant thing in my mind is when I went home that evening, because I went to school and went through the day. I don't think I even spoke. I didn't speak all day. You know, it's quite a strange thing when I think back. I never said one word all day and nobody noticed. It says something about people, doesn't it? And human beings, really. When I went home that night, I can remember at night there were like shadows shining in onto the wall, and I kept seeing these faces, and the fear was just consuming me. I was desperate to burst out crying because I hadn't cried. And I thought, if I cry and my mum and dad hear me, they're going to come in and this man might come and kill them. So I was petrified to cry. And I could feel this, it's almost like a heartbeat, but in my stomach, like an anxious feeling. And I bit the covers. I just bit them. And then I was able to cry. And I cried and I cried and I cried for hours. But nobody heard. And what I didn't realise then at that point was that I'd never cry again, you know, for 30 years. 30 years, something like, yeah, about 30 years. I did pluck up the courage to, I thought, I'm going to tell my dad. And I walked downstairs and we had a long corridor like an old Victorian terraced house. And it was a Saturday morning and my dad was coming through the front door, and I walked down the stairs, and as he walked in, and I really was going to tell him, you know, what had happened. And he said, "Come in, son, sit down. Your sister's dead." And he went into the kitchen and I heard a sound. And I've heard it many times since in the work that I do now, and it haunts me. It's like the sound of pain and love mixed together. For me, it's the sound of Jesus on a cross. And it's the sound a mother makes when she loses a child. It comes from deep down inside, and it wails out, and it filled the house and bounced off every wall and hit me. And I knew at that moment that I could never speak about what had happened to me. And I went upstairs, and my mum had, she had some painkillers because she had a bad back. And I took a handful of these painkillers. I don't even know why, because I knew nothing about drugs. I just thought, when mum's not well, she takes tablets and she feels better. So I did. I took a handful of painkillers and I laid on the bed. And this little boy just went to heaven. I just floated out of my own body. There was no pain. I felt so comfortable and relaxed. It was like somebody was wrapping like a quilt around me and loving me. And then sadly, as the painkillers wore off, I came back down to earth with a real big bang. It was like I hit the bed and it was just like, it's real. What's happened's real. So I spent, I don't know, probably 30 years, just constantly trying to float away from reality out of my body. And the more I did it, the harder it became when I came back down to earth. Probably by the time I was 14, 15, I was earning more money than my dad from criminal activity because I used to like to plan things and do things. It became like a game, It was like, the games I should have been playing as a child, really. I made into sort of like how I could get money, and I started to play these games. And I found I was good at it. The drugs led me into sort of like an underground dark world. And I had a gun. And then the first time I had a gun in my hand, I remember holding it and touching it and feeling it. And it was like, I felt power like I never felt before. It was like, whether it were loaded or not, I'd touch it and stroke it and hold it. And it was like, I felt so much comfort. And when I put it down, I felt like there was something missing. So I liked to have it with me. And if I couldn't have the gun, then I liked to hold a knife and touch it and feel the handle and touch the blade and that. And I got this sort of like almost sick fascination with guns and knives. It was like, I felt safe when I had them, I think, as I look back, it was, no one's ever going to hurt me again. I've been arrested for murder twice. I've been arrested for armed robbery several times. Been arrested for firearms offences on stupid amounts of occasions when people owed money to other people. I would go, sometimes with others and sometimes on my own, and administer the punishment. There was a time where I just left the house, a young lady's house, and 5 minutes later, the house got hit, and these people would have killed me, and they would have made a real mess of me as well. It wouldn't have been a nice end. They'd have cut bits of my body parts off. And 5 minutes. So again, you've escaped, you've gone. And it's like a bravado. I was sat in a car once at, say, traffic lights, and somebody pulled up beside me and tried to shoot me. Well, they did shoot me. They shot me 3 times, but they missed. And that wasn't scary. That was just part of what was happening at the time, and it just created more adrenaline in me because I didn't have those emotions and those fears. It's bizarre when I look back now because, I'd be led on forward, capping, I'm sure, but not then because life was different then, By this time, I was a young father with 3 children. The police had come round and raided their house looking for guns and stolen items and all sorts over and over and over and over again. I had no respect for authority. And when I discovered cocaine, that was, again, it was like a stimulant, and this confidence and this bravado just went through the roof. And then a few years later, I learned how to rock it up, which means I had crack then, which was far more potent It's cocaine, but it's far more potent. And that was it. My mental health, my relationships, everything so began to suffer. So I'd travel around, you know, people would call me and people would come to me, and I'd travel around and spend a lot of time in Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, and sometimes Leeds, and people would pay me to do criminal acts, and I would willingly. And then I could come back home and pretend to be a normal dad. And I could sustain it. I sustained it for years until one day the crack sort of had such an adverse effect on me that I started to become more and more psychotic. So I became more and more dangerous, and I started to do erratic things. It was on one of these kind of, how can I describe it, kind of, definitely not adventures. It was on one of these outings, shall we say, that I'd gone to collect a debt, really. And I was in a car on my own, a bottle of vodka, which I always had, just down the side of in the pocket at the side of the car, crack in my pocket, and a crack pipe, and a gun in a plastic bag. I always had a knife on me anyway, and I was waiting outside the gym for the guy to come out. He did. He walked out of the gym, and I jumped out of the car with my gun wrapped in the carrier bag. And as I had it by my side and just turned to walk towards him, I looked, and there were two little girls behind him, and he just grabbed the hands, got hold of both hands, and turned and walked. And I was just stood off to the side. And you know, I really, really wish I could say, the little girls were there, so I didn't do anything, and because I wasn't that bad. But that's not true. So the truth is that I didn't care the kids were there. I wouldn't have hurt the children, but I wouldn't have cared that they were there. I'd have just thrown them out the way or something. And light shone off the hands, and I didn't have a clue what was happening. And it hit me in the face, and I couldn't see, but only for 10, maybe 15 seconds. And then I started to shake, started to feel sick, I was sweating, and I felt something rip inside my stomach. And then blood started coming out of my mouth, and it was all over me. I looked like I'd been stabbed up. I staggered back to the car, and they just walked past. And I grabbed the vodka, and I drank it, and if anybody understands addiction, you know, like, you have a drink and you smash it. If you're an addict, you don't sip it usually, but I didn't. I smashed it because I wanted that, and it didn't give me that, feeling. And it didn't burn. You'd at least get a feeling from it. It went down, it just didn't burn, it didn't do anything. So I put it back down the side and just smoked a little bit of crack, and it didn't do anything. So when everything that you know to take your feelings away and to change your feelings doesn't work, what do? So I just drove away, and I just pulled into a little industrial park, pulled over to the side, and I said type of a prayer, but it wasn't really a prayer. It was like, I didn't really believe in God, but I just thought, you know, I said it out loud as well, you know, God, if you're real, you better help me. So, you know, kind of pretty demanded that God do something, you know, which it makes me smile now because I think it's quite arrogant, that, isn't it? You know, God, you better do what I want you to do. And I got the answer straight away. Nothing. Nothing at all. Just deadly silence. And you know, I'd had enough. I was so desperate inside. I can't tell you how painful it was inside me. All these years of pain just swirling, the drugs not working, the alcohol not working for the first time. And in a second, I just put it under my chin and I just pulled the trigger. And it didn't go off. And I knew guns. I knew it was an automatic weapon, and I knew that if it clicks, I die. Because there's bullets in it. It can't not go off. And it didn't go off. I just dropped it on the floor, and water just started pouring out my eyes. It was, I wasn't sobbing, but I hadn't cried for perhaps 30 years, you know. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know the emotions or the feelings, but it was like my eyes were being washed. That's all I can describe it as. And then after 5-10 minutes, the water running out my eyes turned to sobs. And, you know, I cried and I cried and I cried. And I felt like I was crying for the little boy, you know. I didn't feel like I was crying for me. I felt like I was crying for that little boy that couldn't tell anybody and no one had seen him. I felt I was crying because nobody loved him. I left, got rid of the car. You know, before I put the gun away, I fired it into the ground several times, and it fired every time. So I took away with me this different thing inside me, and I didn't understand what it was. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I was arrested, I think within a day, on a different charge, a minor charge. And when they questioned me at the police station, it became quite apparent that I was, you know, mentally ill and become quite dangerous, not just to myself, but potential danger to other people. And I got a section on the Mental Health Act. So I had a policeman on one side and a policeman on the other, and they took me into a psychiatric unit, and it was like a law, you know, like an old-time law, this big tough guy that's had all this money and done all these bad things, this gangster, whatever you want to call it, walking into a psychiatric unit, battered and beaten and not even knowing who he is. And you know what's sad? It felt like an 11-year-old boy was walking into a psychiatric unit. It was almost like I needed a grown-up to hold my hand. But whilst I was in there, something so bizarre happened to me. I sat down, people gave me cigarettes that didn't even know me. These were the patients. Somebody gave me a pair of training shoes and somebody else gave me a tracksuit. I thought, why are they giving me stuff? What? They don't even know me. And I think as I look back, they didn't know me, but they knew my pain. And I was sat round a table drinking coffee and with two guys, and one was a schizophrenic, one was an alcoholic who'd had a breakdown. And they both told me that they'd been sexually abused. And I never heard anybody ever say that out loud. And, you know, for the first time, I just said, you know, that happened to me. But not as bad as you. It only happened to me once. And the guy said, he went mad at me, he went, mate, once is too much. It's the same. Never ever say it only happened once. I came out and I ended up in a homeless hostel, which really gave my pride a massive hammering. I had like an angelic experience whilst I was in there, and I tried to process whether that was my mental health or whether it was a God. And years and years later, now, I believe it was God, and maybe God worked in my illness, but I'd never seen anything that wasn't there before, you know. But I did at this point, and it was an angel, and the angel was speaking to me and saying things, and I did what this angel said, and it's led me out of addiction. And I understand people might listen and say, yeah, well, you were nuts. And yes, I was, and I was getting well. But it did work for me. It did something for me. I was sat in a McDonald's restaurant and I was like, I don't know, probably 17 and a half stone of muscle. I looked scary then. But I was all right, I was quieter. I was a little bit more humble than I had been, and there was no drugs involved, or drink. And I looked across the room and I saw an alcoholic and whisper where. And I bought him a coffee and I bought him something to eat. And I arranged to meet him the next day and talked to him and tried to help him. And he did. He turned up the next day and I went in the same place. And I helped him, and he died 2 years later. But he died with a type of faith and a type of understanding of something bigger than him, really. And he died sober, and he got his family and his life, I guess. And I never told him. He was the man that raped me. And the truth of what happened was, the second time I met him was to kill him, wasn't to help him. I had a knife on my sleeve and I had one in my sock, because if somebody took the knife off me whilst they were killing him, I'd take the one out of my sock and finish him off. I'd spend 30 years slavering over if I ever saw him again. All my pain, all my fears, all my anxieties were from this man. And he had to die. It's like the power to do it was so strong, And I wasn't going to do it to get away with it. I was going to do it in front of everybody, almost like there's a piece of work. Look what happens to people who do that. And I walked into the restaurant and dropped the knife, so I just had hold of the blade in my hand. And he smiled at me. And it was that. When he smiled at me, this anger inside me just got huge. And I heard a voice, not a schizophrenic type voice, it was in my head, in my thinking, and it was inside. And he just said, "Mate, why are you living in his sin?" And he just stopped me in my tracks, put the knife back up my sleeve. "Why are you living in his sin?" And he wouldn't go away, and he just kept coming back into my thoughts. So I went and bought 2 coffees and sat down, shaking inside. And he's just talking, and I'm thinking, you're getting it. You've got to, I couldn't understand what were happening to me. And I got this moment of absolute clarity. And it was forgiveness. He's never saying it's all right what you've done to me, there. Because I thought that's what it were, and that's impossible for me. There, it's all right, doesn't matter, because it does matter. It destroyed my life. But forgiveness was saying, I'm not going to live in his sin. Because if I live in his sin, I kill him, I go to jail, hurt other people, my family, and the sin goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Or I choose not to live in it. And it was just so simple. For me at that moment, I did feel forgiven, for the things I'd done. Life changed. My life definitely changed from that point on. I found this sort of type of faith that I sort of were drawn towards. And I went to university and to study theology in Manchester. And it was very strange because I didn't have much of an education. And to be really bad, you had to get 40% in your first year. That's to be bad. I got 17. So it was not just really bad, it was very, very, very bad. And they said, you can't read and write properly, mate, can you? I went, no. So why are you trying to do a degree? I said, I thought God had helped me. And they just sort of smiled, and I got tested. They paid and got me tested, and I found out I was dyslexic and dyspraxic, and I had something called Hurling syndrome. And I got these glasses, not these ones, but similar. And my world changed. Honestly, it was like I could read, and I could understand, and I could process things, and I got an education. I met some amazing people, and I ended up getting ordained, ordained as a minister. I went back to Burnley, where I'm from, and I thought, how do you start this church, this movement? Made some sandwiches, bought some cigarettes, and I had a little suitcase with some of my old clothes in, and I just sat on the floor outside McDonald's, funnily enough, and there was a guy begging, and I gave him a sandwich and a cigarette, and I had a flask, and we shared a cup of coffee, and we talked, and he said, you won't understand, like with drugs and stuff. I said, oh, Lord. So I talked to him, and he told me his story, and I listened, and then another guy came over, and he said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, we're talking about God. And he said, oh, there is no God. And then another guy came along, and we sat down on the floor. In 2 weeks, there was 80 to 100 people outside McDonald's, either sat on the floor, sat on benches. The ministry started there, which is called Church on the Street. It's been a roller coaster ride from that moment on. My life has just been this kind of bizarre journey, and it gets more and more bizarre, by the day almost. The way I want to sort of break poverty is different, I think, to what we're seeing in this country at the moment. Is we're seeing resources and money go to the middle poor because they're a lot easier to manage. So the way we do at Church on the Street is to change the point of access so that the people at the very, very bottom can access healthcare, mental health care, food, and everything else that goes with that. And that's what's different, and that's not popular. That's not sexy, and it's very problematic doing it, and it doesn't win you friends and favour, but it's the right thing to do. From a bad beginning, to a good ending, I hope anyway.